They've become a recent fashion trend. They're some of the most comfortable shoes. Today I'm talking about the Crocs sandal. We get a lot of people asking us, can you customize Crocs? And the general response from Angelus is no, don't customize your Crocs. Seriously, don't customize your Crocs. But every once in a while there's somebody out there that says they have the secret ticket, the technique that nobody knows about that helps you customize things like Crocs or midsoles or anything else that's made out of rubber. So today, I'm gonna explore the question, can you customize Crocs? I'm Bryan with Swell Guy Customs, and let's jump in. So I've got two different colored Crocs, black and white, and we're gonna use both of these Crocs to experiment and try a bunch of different techniques that people claim help make it easier to customize your Crocs. First, starting with the black, we're gonna do what we always do with shoes, and we're gonna prep it with some Angelus Prepare and Deglazer. The next step we're gonna try that people recommend is sanding down the shoe. Now, sanding can be a helpful tool when painting anything. When painting wood or plastic, sanding will rough up the surface and give the paint something to adhere to. But will it work for the Crocs rubber surface? Well, we're gonna find out. I've got some 200 and 600 grit sandpaper, and I'm gonna work my way up and just try to buff up and rough up the surface to help with painting. The next step that people suggest is using Adhesion Promoter. This is a spray that you can find in any automotive store. Usually what it's used is for plastic or metal. It creates a surface that is a little bit more friendly to paint. It's sort of a light spray glue that makes the surface more tacky, and therefore the paint has something to grab onto. We're gonna try it on this rubber surface and see if it helps. So I took it outside and I ran about 2 to 3 layers of the Adhesion Promoter. Let that dry a little bit to start to tack up. And now we're just gonna jump straight into painting. So we've got our shoes painted, we've got our design down. The last step that some people recommend is using Acrylic Finisher. Now, there's a common misconception with Angelus Acrylic Finisher that it's some magic shield that's going to protect your shoes from anything, and it's actually just more to provide an even finish, to create an even shine to the shoe, whether you're going for glossy or matte. It does add some protection to the shoes. It does add a layer to help from any sort of outside rubbing, but is it a magic protective shield that's going to keep your paint sticking to the shoe? Not really. We're gonna do it anyways because it's always good to use some acrylic finisher, and then we're gonna test the shoes to see if all of our steps have really created a custom Croc that you can wear out anywhere you go. So we've gone through every step to make sure that the paint can stick to these shoes as best as possible. We prepped, we sanded, we hit it with Adhesion Promoter, we painted on in light layers, and hit it with a few layers of the satin acrylic finisher. It's all put together. This is everything that everybody recommends, so we'll see how long it'll last. But you might be thinking, well, maybe paint won't stick to the Crocs, but what if we dyed the Crocs? What if we hit it with enough dye that it soaks into the shoe, and that's how we get the color to last? Well, we thought of that. So we have a pair of white Crocs. We're gonna try 2 different ways of dyeing it, and we'll see between the dye and the paint if any of these techniques will last on a pair of Crocs. So we have our plain white pair of Crocs, completely untouched, perfectly bright white, and we're gonna test some different dye methods on these. The 2 methods we're thinking is just hitting it straight up with the leather dye using a Dauber and just running it all over the shoe, try to get it as soaked in there as possible. And the other way we're thinking is literally just dunking a pair of shoes and letting it sit and soak in dye for an hour or so and seeing how much penetration the dye can get into the rubber of the shoe. I've got our white Crocs, I got a big bucket, and I got a lot of dye. So we're gonna pour some of this in this bucket, take one of these Crocs, put it in there, and just let it sit and dip inside the dye, see what happens. So while I'm letting the shoe soak in the dye, I'm gonna take the other shoe and try a different method. I'm just gonna take Angelus dye and use a Dauber and run it across the surface as many times as I can to try to get the dye soaked into the rubber. So after a few layers of dye, we let it sit for about an hour, just trying to let it soak as much of the dye as it possibly can. Anytime you're using the leather dye, afterwards you want to hit it with a little bit of denatured rubbing alcohol to wipe off any of the excess dye that hasn't dried. This is normal when using it on leather or on suede. We're going to also do it on here and hope that most of the dye has at least somewhat soaked into the rubber. So as you can see, the dye didn't stay at all. Usually when you use denatured alcohol on leather or suede, it's just to take off the top layer of color, but the color still remains on the material. Here, didn't stay at all. Even in some areas, it's white back to its original color. So I think it's pretty easy to say this is a fail. So we took our dipped croc out and washed it off, and it did just as bad as the other one. So if you were thinking like, hey Brian, what if I just washed it off with water instead of using alcohol? Well, the results are pretty much the same. Overall, it looks like the dye just has no way of penetrating the rubber, getting in there, and actually changing the color. Mind you, we were using Angelus leather dye, which is an alcohol-based dye, which is a lot stronger and a lot more concentrated than your over-the-counter dye that you find at a craft store. So even with that industrial strength dye, it basically just gave us a really uneven, blotchy, faded purple color. So as you can see, even if you have it covered in gallons and gallons of dye for over an hour, it's still a fail. But we still have our painted pair. We gotta try them on, wear them out, see, will the paint hold up on the Crocs? So we took the shoes outside, did a little bit of a wear test, walking around, running around, jumping around, just getting some flex into it to see how the paint holds up. Honestly, so far, I'm pretty surprised. No cracks or peels, which is a good sign. I'm gonna put it through my own wear test, just flexing around and see how it holds up after that. Now, this is clearly exaggerated, but I'm just trying to get the amount of wear that it might face over a long time period of wearing it and seeing how the paint holds up after that. So after putting it through all that, there's still no apparent cracks, but there are some areas where I could see where maybe some of the paint is starting to maybe lift a little bit, and over time, that's probably gonna be the problem areas where a lot of that paint's gonna start coming up. But other than that, I wanna kind of put it through a more tried and true test. We're gonna have someone wear them for about a week of regular use, and we'll come back and see what they look like. All right, so we're back in the studio. It's been about a week since I customized these Crocs. We had some of the fine people here at Angelus wear the Crocs around the office, at home, just to give it a normal week's worth of wear. And if we take a closer look at the Crocs, we can see how they held up. As we can see, there is quite a bit of paint chipping, especially in the toe creases. This can happen, but it's definitely exacerbated here. There's a lot of peeling, especially around the hole areas, and eventually they're probably just gonna peel off completely. I will say I'm pretty surprised by how they're holding up. I thought there was gonna be a lot more damage, a lot more of the paint coming off. So they are holding up pretty nicely. But what we are seeing is the beginnings of some major damage. There's some areas where it's really gonna start getting worse, and the paint's just gonna come right off pretty much. Overall, I will say I'm a bit surprised. If you wanted to do this for yourself, paint your own pair of custom Crocs just to wear around the house, I feel like that's fine, no harm in that. Have a little fun, experiment. But if you do see someone selling online, claiming that they've figured out how to make a long-lasting custom Croc, you might be a little bit more hesitant, and you can use this video and this as proof that the damage does come a little harder than they would on a pair of custom sneakers. So what did we learn today? Well, we learned that one, dyeing is really messy and it gets all over the place, but it also doesn't seem to soak into the Croc material very well, and in the end result you're gonna get a very messy, very faded look. If that's what you're going for, fine, but I would consider that a failure. As for the paint, We've learned that it actually holds up a lot better than we expected, and whether or not you can customize Crocs, I think is a little bit more of a gray area. If you want to customize for yourself, I say that's fine, that's great, but as a business, I don't know if that's necessarily the right thing to do. If you have some tips that we might have missed, something that you know about customizing Crocs that we just don't, feel free to comment down below, let us know. Overall, we had a lot of fun experimenting with this and trying to bring some more information to light for you guys. I don't want to say we're the final authority on this. Have fun, go out and experiment some more, but I think we have some definitive proof here on how difficult it is to actually get a custom Croc to last. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Bryan Phillips. You can check me out on Instagram at SwellGuyCustoms. Feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and we'll catch you next time.